Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is really a great pleasure for me to be here this morning, and I would like to thank all organizers and especially Professor Lawrence Young for this kind invitation. Today I will talk about one of the research activities in which I am involved, related to the area of signal and image processing, but also involving many other areas related to security, trust, and data protection. This application area is the automatic border control. In particular, I am involved in a research project, a European research project called ABC for Europe, which is directed to design the new homogeneous and standard biometric gates for passport control in various places like the airport, ports, and many other locations. But this project is also directed to experiment on new technologies which will make this kind of biometric traits usable for many other applications in the daily life. Especially, they will be directed to allow people to identify the specific needs associated to individuals, and as a consequence to be able to create an adaptive, evolving environment, a smart environment, which will allow us to live much better, having the environment surrounding us adapting automatically to our needs. But let's go to the talk today, in which I will try to present the basic idea behind biometrics, the biometric gates, and all other needs for security and data protection which are involved in this kind of application. Biometric gates are not just the gates that we may see at the airport, but there is a huge infrastructure behind it. There are several different information systems that need to be taken care all together, that need to share data, that need to share search about the individuals in order to allow or not the individual to pass the control. So we have a lot of problems related to the security of these searches and the data protection in these searches and the connections among these information systems, since everything needs to be protected from the point of view of security. We do not want to have intrusions in this kind of system. And we need also to preserve the data, to protect the data in the whole process, since we do not want that someone is able to steal this data and use them improperly. So what we are going to see is just the basic concepts related to these infrastructures, and we are going to see which are the typical traits that are used nowadays, and which are the future trends, which are the challenges and the future trends in order to make this application much more usable, and especially to extend the knowledge that we gather in this kind of application for our daily life, to have the environment adapting on our needs. Biometric gates are very used nowadays, since this allows to simplify a lot the recognition of the individuals, and allow also to ensure that the check is done in an homogeneous way, ensuring the quality of the check, the attention of the personnel may not be always homogeneous. After a few hours of work as border control, people may be tired and they may not use the same care, the same attention on everybody. The objective is to simplify the travel, to make the queue at the border control as short as possible, but preserving the accuracy of the identification, and as a consequence to prevent possible intrusion, possible delinquent entering or leaving a country. This border control is directed to verify the validity of the documents, to verify the identity of the person, and to make sure that this person is really eligible to cross the border in any of the direction. So there are a lot of proposals that has been experimented in the recent past. If you go around the world, you can find several of this implementation. There is a variety of biometric passport including some biometric information, and a number of devices that have been implemented to control this information. One of the big problems that is important to face is the interoperability of all these systems. And this has been a challenge in the recent past. Some solutions have been introduced and some standardization have been introduced, but still there is not an homogeneous environment, an homogeneous framework which is able to work all over the world, so that everybody we can use this kind of automated control. The benefit of the automatic border control are several. In particular, it will allow to reduce the processing time, since scanning of the information, scanning of the biometries can be done much faster, but it allows also to improve the security, the quality of the recognition, since the same algorithms are used for every person, and we do not need to rely on the ability of the individuals, of the police officers at the border, who need to be trained properly in order to make this job with high quality, and they need to have a short period of time on the job in order to avoid tiredness, and as a consequence a reduction in the security verification. The biometric gates may allow also to increase the throughput, and we see that this is very beneficial not only for travelers, but is also beneficial in many other daily life applications in which this kind of technology has been originally developed for police security, surveillance, can be actually used. If you like to recognize, for example, a friend at a distance, and you have some difficulties in looking at a distance, with a camera you can actually help people with low eyesight to see and recognize automatically the person. So there are many applications that can benefit of this analysis. In addition, we can reduce the cost, since we can have an automatic process implemented in parallel, and the same number of staff employed in the border control can do a better job without having to increase too much the number of the personnel, with the need also of additional training and possible other problems. As I mentioned, there are some examples which are already working in various geographical areas. Which are the typical infrastructures that are behind this system? Since this is the most critical part, and is why I pointed out at the beginning, these technologies are important in a more global scenario, since we need to consider privacy, security across the whole information system behind the specific infrastructure. What we have is a set of steps that need to be taken care during the specific recognition process. We need to read the document, we need to extract information, we need to extract the biometric trace from the person who is at the gate, and then we need to make the comparison looking in the various database of the police, not only in that country, but also in all other countries connected to the system. And this may be a problem since we may not be allowed, and usually the police does not, the various polices around the world does not allow to collect all information in a single repository and run the search. They want to have the control of the data, and as a consequence we have a distributed database, one per country typically, or groups of country, and we need to perform a distributed search in real time in many different countries. So this is a challenge, as I said, for the security and the data privacy, and this needs to be done in real time, obviously, since you do not want to have the individual at the border to wait too long to be accepted or not. The electronic passport needs to satisfy some rules in order to make sure that they are compliant with the various devices in the area in which you are traveling. Typically, they are composed by the gates consist in some specific structure, physical structure, with an entry and exit door. Here are some examples. You have a document reader in these gates, which allow you to show the document and scan the basic information. You have then appropriate devices which allow to capture your biometries contained in the document to perform the match. Typically is face, finger, and then we have some sensors which allow to monitor the process and make sure that there are no intrusion, that the process of recognition is of presenting your biometry and the recognition are performed in an appropriate way. And then you may have also some additional displays which allow to show the instruction to the user. What we have typically is a one-step process which tries to aggregate all the steps in a single position, or you may have a more complex solution like a two steps in which you perform first the reading of the document and then the recognition of the biometries. In many cases, this second approach is preferred since it avoids to have too many instructions to be given to the user in the same place at the same time, and this may confuse the user in some cases, especially when they are not really frequent travelers. The structure with the two-level allow also to simplify the interface and in some cases make the collection of the biometries much easier and in a more controlled place. Other aspects which are important to consider in the case of the biometry of the biometric gates are alternative documents that may be used in addition to the passport and the use of more structured gates in order to allow a more easier and secure processing of the biometries. The biometric control of the passport is a very complex process. Here I know that is unreadable, but the goal is not to enter in the details of the various activities, but to show that there are many various activities involved. We need first, of course, to collect the biometries, store the biometry on the passport, store the biometries in a database of the police in order to ensure that everything is ready for the operation when the individual try to pass the control. And then we have all activities related to the real-time processing, which means I need to identify the person reading the document. I need to go back to the database to retrieve the information related to the person, retrieve his biometry or her biometries. I need to put all together so that when I do the second step in the biometric gate to collect the biometry, extract the information from the biometries and try to extract the characteristic feature representing the individual in a unique way, then I need to, I can compare this information with the information which has been stored in the system, in the databases. But there are also several other operations that are needed, since I need to monitor the gate, I need to monitor that the process is performed correctly, I need to monitor that the individual is not trying to present fake biometries. I need to monitor that all connections in the distributed system are working properly and the data are arriving at the proper time. I need also to make sure that the gate is monitored from the point of view of the quality of the biometries which are collected in order to prevent that a degradation of the sensors that are used, and as a consequence of the quality of the biometries I collect, and as a consequence of the recognition that I may have. So there are really a lot of tasks which involve a complex distributed system which need to work all together in real time. There are also other information systems which often are integrated and cooperate with the automatic border control. For example, the visa information system. Whenever a person needs a specific visa, we need also to check that the visa information has been stored properly. In some cases, we have some registered travelers programs which allow to speed up the process, and we need to check also this. In some countries, there are systems which allow to monitor the entrance and the exit, so that to be sure not to have illegal people staying in the country, and so on. I do not want to enter too much in the details of these technologies and these systems, but as I mentioned, this kind of interaction is much broader, is not just related to the entering in the specific gate and be recognized there, since there are a lot of additional information that may need to be gathered and compared in order to authorize the persons to enter. It's not enough that the person may have a valid passport and be exactly the owner of the passport, but they may need also we may need also to have additional check and additional information to be collected. In order to save some time, I would like to point out one of the last important recent developments that we have in the field related to the use of mobile devices to implement mobile gates. Instead of having a gate like in the conventional way I showed before, we may use handheld devices to make this experience more usable, not only in specific place, but also in any city, in any place around the world, so as to facilitate the work of the security people. Biometric traits. The typical biometric traits that are used, and I would like to quickly show them, since these are some important challenges, and it is important to point out some of the privacy issues that we may have in this perspective. The typical biometric traits are fingerprint, iris, and face, and they are collected according to some standards in order to make sure that the quality of the identification is as higher as possible. This is one of the very used technique. There are many technologies which are using some of the are extracting some of the characteristic traits of the face and are then comparing these characteristic traits with the stored information. I do not want to enter too much in these technical details since this is not an image processing conference, but if you are interested, I will be happy to discuss them later. The typical problems that we have in face recognition are system problems related to the fact that we need to have a camera, we need to have a good environment to collect the image of the face, and we need to be sure that there are no fakes presented to the system. The quality is very important and is always a challenge with the information which is stored in the passports and presented to the camera in the biometric gates. Here are some examples which clearly point out a variety of problems that we need to face every time we use the biometric gates. So we need to make sure that we have a good quality of the image collected of the face in order to be sure that the recognition is appropriate. There are various trends in research, in image processing research, that try to identify some specific characteristic like adding, for example, the periocular areas, or try to look to the change of the face in time with the aging of the person, so that we avoid to not recognize people who are aged more than the picture stored in the database. And also there are some research in the area of recognition at the distance, so that is possible to increase the distance at which we try to take the picture and not force people to be about half meter from the camera. And many other specific challenges. Fingerprint is one of the oldest and more traditional techniques which have been used, is very popular and used in this kind of applications, and as well as in many other kind of police application. Practically what we need to do is to recognize the ridges and the valleys that we have on the fingertips by trying to match the distribution of some characteristic point. We are not looking actually to exactly to the shape of the biometric traits, but we are looking to some characteristic point where some ridges and valleys merge. Since this is the really unique, the distribution of this point on the fingertip is really the unique identification of the person. Also in this case, we have various sensors, and we need to make sure that the quality of the fingerprint is collected properly. We have issues related to the quality, since we may have damaged fingerprints, we may have grease on the sensor, and we need to avoid all these kind of problems in order to collect good quality fingerprint. The trends that we have are directed to address the basic issues that we have with the quality, poor illumination, not appropriate placing on the fingertip on the scanner. Basically, what the trends are now looking to recognizing the fingerprints at a distance. So without the need to touch a specific sensor, but just to show your fingerprint to the camera. And this is very important, since it could be one of the technologies, the recognition at a distance of the fingertip can be a significant technology for the daily use. For example, very often we are using these technologies to protect the cell phone or the computer, but we need dedicated sensors. With the fingertip showed to the camera is already there, and it may have a much better quality than other sensors. In addition, we do not have deformation or other problems due to the sensor, since the fingertip is directly shown to the camera. Iris recognition is another critical point, and is used in some of the gates, since it will need more care from the point of view of the user to show the eyes to the camera and have the image of the iris collected. There are a lot of technologies which have been developed, but there are also a lot of problems related to the fact that we may have reflections, the eye may not be completely open, and so on. We may have also some fake eye that is shown to the camera. Future trends of this technology are related to improving the segmentation and trying to extract as much as possible information from the visible part, so as to limit the information needed to perform the recognition. In the future, what is under study to improve the experience, simplify the structure of the biometric gate, is the use of contactless fingerprint or palm print, the vision of the iris on the move without the need of showing the eyes to a specific device, but just with the camera, even at a distance, or to use the voice or other typical traits, but merging all of them all together. In particular, what we can do, sorry, let's move. What we can do for contactless fingerprint is that we can avoid a lot of difficulties in collecting the fingertip, and we can also reconstruct in a three-dimensional way the fingertip, having a much more accurate identification of the critical point. Another technique which is an extension of this fingerprint is the palm print. Also, the palm print contains a lot of additional information which can be very useful, and if we use a contactless approach, we can have a really good result without having to use dedicated devices, which may be more difficult for the inexperienced user, or in places where it is difficult to bring these devices. I do not want to enter too much in these additional details. One of the other very important points for the future is to put together many different biometries and work with them so all at the same time, so that if a biometry is not sufficient due to any reason, the other can help. And this increases the amount of critical information that we want to protect as data, since it's very difficult to change the face, to change the fingerprint, to replace your eyes if these biometries are stolen and used in an appropriate way. So these aspects are very important in all this kind of application. The privacy is one of the most critical aspects with the passport, but also with the whole systems. And there are a lot of techniques which have been studied with a central repository or a distributed repository with some representation of the data to protect the biometries with a various kind of encryption, the biometries themselves, on extracting the biometry, leaving the key in the hands of the user, or other kind of solutions. Here is a long list of technologies which have been experimented, and this is a proof that this is a very, very important problem in this kind of application, and will become much more important if we consider that these biometric technologies, which have been developed for the security area, will be used more and more and more in the daily life. And for banking, for e-government applications, for entertainment, and for e-commerce. And this will pose a bigger challenge to the protection of the identity of individuals, and as a consequence, a lot of work, a lot of research work for us. Conclusion, as I mentioned, the use of biometric technologies is very useful in the border control, but as I mentioned at the beginning, will be very useful in order to create evolvable, adaptive environment which will be centered on the user and will adjust the environment by using ambient intelligence solutions to provide the best experience to the user itself. Just for your reference, if anyone will be interested, I will leave the slides. Here are few books that we published on these advanced topics, and several references for your use. Thank you. Thank you for your kind attention. And if you have any question, I will be happy to answer now or later during the conference.